Mike Harper, a reclusive engineer living in a small town after his son died in a car accident, goes to the lake every day as a way to escape his memories. Everything changes when he meets Natalie, a single teacher, and her son, Eli. At first, he just helps reinforce the shoreline, but gradually, Mike becomes attached to them. In Eli, he sees his son, which causes both pain and hope. As his inner conflict arises, Mike must face his fear of loving again, over time. Through a simple and sincere presence, Mike finds a way to move on, not to forget, but to learn to remember differently. When he lived in the city, Mike Harper used to wake up at 6 a.m., drink strong black coffee in a thermos, and drive to the Philadelphia Civil Engineering office. Now he wakes at 5 a.m., brews weak, cold coffee, and goes fishing on the lake not to catch fish, but to listen to the water lapping gently against the rocks. There are no honking horns, no blueprints, no reminders of his old life, except for the nights he dreams of his son sitting in the back seat of the car, clutching a teddy bear that now has only one ear. Mike lives alone in the old log house his parents left him on the outskirts of Ashbury. It has a low-pitched roof and a backyard that looks out onto the lake, the only thing that makes Mike feel like he hasn't been completely erased from the map. No one in this small town really asks him too much about his past. They knew a man with grey hair, broad shoulders, quiet, but often helped fix pumps, fixed leaky roofs, and avoided crowds. To them, he was the old city engineer who preferred to be alone. That March, the first spring rains lasted 3 days and nights, causing the lake to rise nearly 2 feet. A section of the north bank had eroded, bringing down the wooden fence of the old summer camp. The mayor sent out an emergency application for funding, but before the money could come, they needed someone to assess the risk. Natalie Quinn, a new elementary school teacher, was the first to mention Mike. He used to be the city engineer. She said at a town hall meeting, "I don't know if he'll help, but I thought we should ask." Natalie was a woman in her early 30s, with dark brown hair tied back, dressed simply, and had an 8-year-old son, Eli. She had moved from Vermont after her divorce, renting a small house near the lake. Mike saw them pass by his yard a few times. Eli would kick an old soccer ball around and ask his mother questions over and over again. Natalie would smile a smile that Mike found both comforting and annoying. When a man from town knocked on Mike's door to ask for help, he didn't answer right away. On the 3rd day, Natalie brought Eli to knock on the door. "Harper?" Natalie asked. When Mike opened the door, his hands still slick with oil from the lawnmower he was taking apart. "Mike's fine," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We need someone who knows about soil and structure to see if the lakeshore is safe. I thought, if you have time, just take a look." Mike looked down at Eli. The boy was twirling an old baseball cap in his hands, looking around the porch as if imagining another world. Some part of Mike, the part he always wanted to bury, made him nod. "I'll take a look," he said. Mike walked along the lake the next morning, carrying a measuring tape and an old notebook, the ones he had used when he worked in the city. The soil had washed away, revealing jagged rock like scars on his skin. He knelt down, pressed his hands into the damp mud, closed his eyes, and felt the hardness and softness with the intuition of someone who had calculated with both reason and feeling. From the landslide, he looked across the lake, saw Eli playing soccer alone, and Natalie standing nearby reading a book, still glancing at her son. They should have banned children from this place, he thought. But that was what kept him from turning away right away. That afternoon, Mike knocked on Natalie's door with a rough sketch. "I don't have any software, just hand-drawn," he said when she invited him in. Natalie's rented house had only 2 bedrooms, a kitchen connected to the living room, and a worn but clean sofa. There was a watercolor of Eli's hanging on the refrigerator, a house, a sun, and a green lake. Mike handed her the pad. "Needs to be reinforced with wire mesh and some gravel, if done right. It should be fine for a few years." Natalie studied it, silently. "Thanks," she said. "I didn't think you'd help so quickly." Mike shrugged. "I don't like people falling into water." Eli came running from the back room, holding a toy plane with a broken wing. "Uncle Mike, can you fix this?" he asked. Mike stiffened. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had called him uncle. But then he sat down on a chair and picked up the toy. "Let's see. Do you have glue?" Natalie brought out a bottle of plastic glue. Mike worked in silence, his fingers steady, each movement precise as if he were mending some broken memory of his own. In the days that followed, Mike began to come around more often. Not often, but enough for people in town to start asking each other Mr. Harper and that new teacher. The whispers didn't reach Mike, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that every morning he went to the lake with a new awareness, not just to hide, but to guard. He rebuilt the eroded banks, one small step at a time. Natalie and Eli brought him cookies now and then. He ate sweets for the first time in years. The sweetness made his lips tremble. One afternoon, Natalie asked, "Do you have a family?" Mike didn't answer right away. He looked down at the lake, seeing the sunlight glinting on the water like an oil leak on asphalt. "We did," he said. "My son died in a car accident a long time ago." Natalie said nothing. Her silence wasn't feigned. It wasn't pity. Mike felt his heart soften in an inexplicable way. "I haven't driven since," he added. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready." "I don't know what ready is," he replied. That night, Mike went home, opened a drawer, and took out an old leather journal. He wrote, "There's a boy named Eli. He plays soccer like you. But he's not. And he doesn't have to be you. He's himself enough. I find that strange, but nice." He closed the notebook and sat looking out at the lake. In the dim twilight, he thought he could hear his son's laughter, somewhere on the wind, not clearly, but not as far away as before. One Saturday morning in early summer, Mike was relaying the steel grating near the newly reinforced lake shore when Eli appeared, his cap tilted to one side and a hopeful smile on his face. "Uncle Mike, are you free today?" Mum said. "If you're not busy, you could come watch my first soccer game." Mike paused. He remembered it was Saturday. He remembered Natalie had mentioned the local youth league, but he had pretended not to hear. All social invitations made him uncomfortable, but at this moment, Eli's eyes were too much like the ones his son had given him when he'd asked him if he'd come to the class music concert. Mike stammered, standing up, dusting off his hands. "I'll be starting," Eli said, and ran off before Mike could answer. The field was behind the elementary school, where weeds and mud were never a problem. Mike came and stood away from the spectators, behind the trees. He didn't want anyone to recognize him, didn't want curious looks or greetings, but he stood there, half an hour, in the sun, watching the number 11, Eli, run around like a little sparrow, clumsy but determined. Eli missed the last penalty. The team lost. The boy stood there, tears in his eyes. Mike took a step forward, then stopped. Natalie ran forward. She hugged him, said something Mike couldn't hear. Then she turned around, saw him. "You're here," she said, not surprised. "I was standing far away." Mike nodded, not explaining further. "Thanks." He tried. Natalie smiled, a tired but sincere smile. He used to be afraid to go out on the field. He was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being laughed at. Not anymore. Mike nodded again, but he was uneasy all day. The unease clung to him like the smell of old car exhaust. He saw his son in Eli, and it warmed him and terrified him. He felt like he was betraying his son's memory, letting another child fill a void that should never have been touched. 3 days later, Mike avoided Natalie. He didn't go to the lake in the morning. He didn't answer the knock on the door. On the 4th day, Natalie came over, not knocking, calling from the fence. "Mike, I don't know what's going on, but if you think you shouldn't care, you're wrong." Mike opened the door, his face tense. "I'm not his father. I never said you were," Natalie said, her voice calm. "But he needs an adult who won't run away. You don't understand. Then tell me so I can understand." Mike looked at her, eyes weary, like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, wondering whether to jump or not. "My son died while I was driving," he said. "It was raining. I turned right too fast. The car skidded, hit the metal fence. I lived. He didn't." Natalie was silent. Mike continued. "Every time I see Eli, I think, if I smile at him, I'll forget my son's smile. If I care about him, I'm losing the boy who's gone." Natalie didn't answer right away. Then she said, softly, "No. You didn't lose him. You kept him by not closing the door on other kids, as if the old love couldn't grow. But it could, as long as you let it." Mike looked down at the ground, his eyes wet. He didn't cry out loud. It seemed dead inside him long ago, but his hands shook, like the first time he touched the wheel after the accident. The next day, Mike went to Natalie's house. Eli was sitting reading a comic book. "Are you hungry?" Mike asked. "There's a sandwich place I used to like. Wanna go?" The boy's eyes lit up and he nodded. Natalie stood in the kitchen, watching silently. Mike turned and asked, "Are you going?" She smiled. "Yeah." The summer passed like a quiet river. Mike no longer jumped when he heard small footsteps running in the yard. No longer hesitated when Eli called him by name. He still lived alone, still kept a diary, but now it included short notes of silly conversations or odd questions Eli asked while fishing. Natalie would occasionally stop by, bringing pastries or a cup of black coffee the way he liked it. When he did, Mike would back away a little, but no longer turn his back. He began to set up a wooden bench near the lake, where the afternoon sun shone. No one asked him what he was doing, but when Natalie saw the small wooden plaque attached to the back of the bench, she was silent for a long time. It was engraved, not to forget, but to remember differently. Eli often sat there after playing ball, carrying a book or some strange stone he had picked up. One time, he asked, "Uncle Mike, what's your son's name?" Mike was surprised. Natalie had never told that story. He looked at Eli and nodded. "Ben," he said. "His full name is Benjamin Cole Harper. Can I sit here and think about him?" Mike smiled softly, as light as the wind on a lake. "I think Ben would like that." In the fall, the school held a camp for students and parents. Natalie was assigned to the third grade group. She asked Mike to come help set up the tent. Mike hesitated, but then agreed. He wasn't wearing anything special, just an old flannel shirt and faded jeans, but Natalie thought it was the first time she'd seen him truly present among other people. That night, around the campfire, Eli told a preposterous story about flying alligators that made the kids laugh. Mike sat in the back, next to Natalie. She whispered, "I don't think I'm a good dad." But Eli never needed a dad. He needed someone who wouldn't disappear. Mike looked at the fire, the flames dancing like memories, but not consuming. He took her hand quietly the first time in years he had touched someone for anything other than practical reasons. Her hand was warm, unhurried, unforced. In October, the shore was completed, reinforced with grass-covered slabs. Children could play near it without fear of collapsing. Mike walked along the lake every afternoon, slowly, as if measuring each step back into life. He started using a phone, a simple one, just for calling and texting, and had Natalie's number. Eli's, the number of the grocery store where the old man who owned it left him hot coffee. One day, in a light rain, Mike stood under the porch, looking out at the lake. He remembered the accident, not to punish himself, but to confront it. He saw more clearly than ever that the pain would not go away, but it did not have to turn him into a zombie, either. He sat down on the bench by the lake, not to fish this time, not to hide, just to sit, to live. Natalie and Eli arrived later. The boy skipped along the stones by the lake, shouting something about finding a giant frog. Natalie sat down next to Mike, saying nothing. The rain stopped. There was only the patter of water from the branches, the wind, and the soft breathing of the three of them sitting together, three wounds still raw, but learning to coexist.